Please be seated.
Mr. Tiger, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we recessed, I had addressed some of the backdrop and development.
I wasn't.
I'm told the BCS channel is not coming through. I noted my own headset needed to be reset after coming in from the break. I don't know if that's the issue.
I don't know what Mr. Mladić says because his voice, as mine, apparently is not reaching.
Up the volume. Up the volume.
I still. No, still. Try to.
Mr. Mladić, can you say something again?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I now can hear you. Can you hear me meanwhile?
Yes, Mr. President, I can.
Yes, then all the technical problems apparently have been resolved. Mr. Mladić receives interpretation. Then we'll restart. And I'll repeat my first words. Mr. Tiger, you may proceed.
Thank you. As I mentioned, before we recessed, I had addressed some of the backdrop and development of the Joint Criminal Enterprise, which General Mladić joined in May of 1992. Now, in its brief, the defense picks unsuccessfully at various aspects of this reality. And a closer examination of those claims will reveal, rather than disprove, the existence of the common purpose, and I'd like to take some of those at this point. The defense argues, for example, that there is no evidence that anyone from the Republic level, quote, enforced, unquote, variant A and B or monitored compliance with it. That's found at paragraph 462 of the defense brief. Contrary to that claim, however, immediately after variant A and B was issued, Mladić assigned an emissary, Mladić, to, quote, visit all our municipalities, unquote, to implement the variant A and B papers that had just been issued. That's P4112, pages 2 and 3, and P2672, pages 3 through 4. And accordingly, on the 16th of January 1992, Mladić advised Mladić that Bielina was, quote, prepared for full cooperation with the instructions, unquote. That's P4115. And on the 22nd of January, from a Krajina municipality, Mladić advised that things were, quote, working, unquote, that a crisis staff would be created that night because, quote, the objective must be carried out, instructions must be carried out, unquote. And that Mladić would be seeing about Birac, Romania, and Herzegovina in due course. P6971, page 7. At the assembly session on the 26th of January 1992, Mladić called for the variant A and B instructions to be carried out. That's P379, page 12. And on the 14th of February, Mladić activated the second level of variant A and B, telling a large extended group of his officials to introduce the, quote, second level, unquote, and to intensify the functioning of the government at any cost and on every single millimeter of our territory, unquote. That's P3774, page 24. As Mladić reminisced in 1995, quote, at the moment the war began, in the municipalities where we were the majority, we had municipal power, held it firmly, controlled everything. In the municipalities where we were in the minority, we set up secret government, municipal boards, municipal assemblies, presidents of executive boards. You will remember the A and B variants, unquote. It's P 4583, page 323. So contrary to the defense claim, there is not only some evidence, but overwhelming evidence that variant A and B was part of the plan. This is another of the many examples of assertions in the defense final brief that are ostensibly demonstrated by evidence that does not in fact support the claim, or grounded on an assertion by a witness who revealed his lack of credibility or reliability, or indeed by a witness who recanted the point on cross-examination, or claims that are simply contradicted by the totality of the evidence. Now, by way of another example, let's take Priador Crisis Staff member Mladić. Now, he's the defense witness whose statement is cited more times than any other in relation to the overarching JCE, 42 times. And his statement is the sole support, for example, for propositions such as the Muslims in Hambarin put up a, quote, strong resistance, unquote. That's at paragraph 930, footnote 2085 of the defense brief. Or that people were released from Omarska when the evidence showed they had not broken the law. That's at paragraph 960, footnote 2158 of the defense brief. Now, those assertions ignore the witness's acknowledgement in cross-examination that he had no basis to make those claims. In fact, had contrary information. And you can find that at T 28902 and 28909 through 910. And beyond those specific examples, this witness attested under oath to the accuracy of portions of his statement that he had recanted or qualified when he testified in Karadzic under oath, prompting the chamber to ask him to consider his attestation over a break. That's T 28916 through 27. And beyond all that are the multiple contradictions that emerge when his claims are weighed against the totality of the evidence in this case. More generally, Your Honors, Section 8 of the prosecution final brief, beginning at page 689, discusses in detail witness credibility and evaluation of evidence. Over the course of the following days, we will continue to look beneath many of the defense claims, exposing similar examples of assertions that are contradicted by a closer look at the evidence ostensibly supporting them and by the totality of evidence related to that point. But returning now to some of those claims in relation to the overarching JCE, the defense also claims that the crisis staffs, led by local personalities who were allegedly focused on only local interests, had, quote, tremendous autonomy, unquote. That's found at paragraph 464 of the defense brief. Now, this claim, too, unravels on examination. The claim that crisis staffs were autonomous is based on the testimony of Trifko Komad, a witness who told you under oath that SAO did not mean Serbian autonomous regions, but claimed instead that the S stood for independent. And he claimed that the Serb and non-Serb ballots for the November 91 plebiscite had the same wording and that the differing colors were merely the result of a technical issue. Propositions so manifestly untrue that the defense stipulated that, contrary to what he had said, it was Serbian autonomous regions, and withdrew reliance on his testimony about the plebiscite ballot. That's found at transcript 28131 through 33. The examples of municipalities where the allegedly outsized personalities and narrow focus of local leaders supposedly distance them from any republic-level plan are Rashola from Sanski Most and Stanic from Foča. Yet in Sanski Most, the crisis staff assigned its deputy president to be responsible for implementing, quote, the ideas of the SDS leadership at the level of the republic, region, and municipality, unquote. That's P404, page 1. And in Foča, crisis staff president Stanic was forthright that, quote, we, the Serbs living to the west of the Drina River, know very well that our leaders are Dr. Radovan Karadzic and General Ratko Mladić, unquote. That's P7753. And Stanic's crisis staff informed Karadzic shortly before the conflict that, quote, we are ready to carry out any order you issue, unquote. P3957. Once again, tug at the citation by the defense and it unravels, revealing a reality instead consistent with the prosecution case. Now, the defense also asserts that, quote, some, unquote, crisis staffs displayed concern for how non-Serbs were treated, citing as two of its primary examples, Sanski Most and the ARC crisis staff. That's at defense brief paragraphs 450 through 451. Sanski Most. That's where the SDS newspaper, The Informator, informed Serbs that in pursuit of the, quote, goal of creating a Serbian state, unquote, the SDS had organized and prepared Serbs for the, quote, bitter battle with the other two peoples. The Muslims, if indeed they are a people, they are not, and the Croats, who have forever carried in their genes a sick, a pathological desire and urge to kill those better, more honest, and, do we need to say this, stronger than they are, unquote. And the Informator continued that Serbs had finally abandoned the mistaken view that those people were anything other than, quote, bloodthirsty villains who have never stopped in their religiously inspired drive to go for the blood of Serbhood, unquote. That's P705, page 6. Sanski Most, where the crisis staff concluded that captured civilians were to be used for exchange, and where the VRS brutally cleansed Muslim villages in pretextual disarming operations after threats were issued to non-Serbs to, quote, destroy and devastate your villages, unquote. That's P3302, page 7. Another prime example of alleged concern for Muslims by crisis staff was the ARC crisis staff, which was headed by, indeed personified by, Radislav Brjanin, whose philosophy was, as we learned, obedience to Karadzic above him and obedience from those beneath him in the hierarchy. That's P6997. And transcript T29759. Radislav Brjanin, who relayed the orders from Karadzic to form the ARC crisis staff. That's T33986 through 87. And who shared goals with Karadzic, brought him to that position. P7757, page 7, and T34040 through 41. This leader, whose, quote, horns, unquote, as one witness put it, could have been, quote, shortened, unquote, by Karadzic at any time, that's P 6994, page 11, and T 29785 through 86. This leader repeatedly called for Muslims to leave Banja Luka, stating that only a small percentage of Muslims could remain. That's P 3989, pages 1 through 2, and P 6994, page 8. Told a huge rally on the same podium with Karadzic that it was the obligation of Serbs to wipe their feet from the, quote, foul non-Christians, unquote, befouling their soil. P 6976, page 2. And who praised Omarska as, quote, a job well done, unquote, P 3959. Scratch the surface, and the evidence exposes as false the suggestion that the Ark Crisis Staff was a kindly force whose benevolent view of Muslims contradicts the common purpose. Now, this failed attempt to depict crisis staffs as belying the common purpose is echoed by defense efforts to suggest that other organs similarly reflected an absence of indications of the common purpose. Thus, in their discussion of the Bosnian Serb Assembly, the defense cites the testimony of one of the Assembly's former members that he was not aware of a common plan to permanently remove other ethnicities. That's at paragraph 348 of the defense brief. Now, that former member, Dodik, denied indeed that he had ever heard at Assembly sessions any indications, any hints of an intention of a goal or a process of moving or expelling Muslims. That's at T 42299. That denial, however, did not square with the reality of what was said at various Assembly sessions. For example, the president of the SDS Executive Board and the coordinator of the Birac SAO, Rajko Dukic, talking about Eastern Bosnia in July 1992, said, quote, if we move further, there is Birac, which is 100 to 108 kilometers away and has 120,000 Muslims. That is how many there were, but I hope that has at least been halved. P 4581, page 73. See also P 7082 and P 7081, page 3, item number 4. Or these remarks at an Assembly session expressing concern that the language of a proposed law on citizenship suggests that, quote, the citizenship of Republika Srpska shall be acquired, among other things, by birth in the territory of Republika Srpska. This refers to all the Muslims and Croats we expelled. In reality, they are citizens of Republika Srpska, unquote. That's P 7196, page 10. And by the way, Your Honors, the bill was sent back for, quote, improvement, unquote. And that's at P 7196, page 11. Or this forthright acknowledgement of the goal of ethnic homogeneity and the resulting need for relocation. Quote, gentlemen, there is no Serbian state in Bosnian pot without gradual depopulation and relocating. If we want ethnically pure Serbian state, and we do, don't we? If we all know and emphasize that we cannot live with them, then we have to realize that these draft maps are offering exactly that, and that there has to be relocation, unquote. P 2508, page 27. Or another statement in an Assembly session, expressing the concern that a proposed peace plan would mean that, quote, everyone will be able to go back to their own territory, unquote, and, quote, we will have to compensate everything we destroyed and burned and 17 mosques that we flattened, unquote, in that particular representative's municipality. That's P2508, page 22. Or any of the other similar assembly references found in the final brief or to which we will be referring today. Again, when we peel back the assertion and examine the evidence on which it purportedly relies, as well as the totality of the evidence that bears on that issue, the evidence reveals the common purpose. The defense has also attempted to paint a picture of a Bosnian Serb leadership whose passivity belies the existence or possibility of any common plan. They claim that the Bosnian Serbs were not preparing for war, indeed, quote, did not foresee war as a possible outcome, unquote, as evidenced by the, quote, reactive decisions, unquote, made by the SDS. And that's at paragraph 312 of the defense brief. These claims first founder on the evidence of Karadic's repeated position that he and the SDS leadership knew far in advance the steps that they wanted to implement, but waited for a politically expedient moment to do so. For example, Karadzic told members of the SFRY presidency in December 1991, quote, "We have made a list of moves, but we won't do anything until Alia messes something up. When Alia messes something up, we will make move number 5, and then we wait. When Alia messes something else up, we make move number 6. P4927, page 4. Or as he explained to the RS Assembly in 1994, there were 9 to 10 actions that the leadership had brainstormed and then carried out. Quote, not all 9 moves straight away, unquote, but, quote, after Alia made a mistake, unquote. And that these pre-planned moves included the Serbian autonomous regions. That's P7762, pages 2 through 3. And in January 1995, Karadzic explained that his pre-planned steps included not only the regions, but bodies such as the Assembly. Quote, we had a list of the actions and steps to take, but we always waited for the Muslims to make a mistake. And after they made one, we created a union of municipalities, and the Serbian autonomous areas next, followed by the regions, and eventually our assembly, and finally, republic, unquote. P6999, page 3. Karadzic made clear to his officials as events were unfolding that, quote, we have all the moves in the envelopes, unquote. And, quote, we have plans for everything. That's D857, pages 6 through 7. He instructed them to conform to that timetable, advising SDS operative Stevandich to tell Berjanin and Kupreshinin, quote, not to do anything stupid. We'll do everything Voyo and Berjo think, but after the failure of the agreements that Alia will bring about, we'll accuse Alia for this failure, unquote, P7763. And make no mistake, those plans included territory. Babic recalled Karadzic and Jovica Stanisic long before the war, clandestinely poring over maps of Bosnia with municipalities depicted in differing colors. That's P4166, T3406 through 08. Karadzic reminisced to the Assembly in 1994 about, quote, making plans, unquote, before the war. Quote, we were thinking then, he explained, about capturing certain features, quote, so that the distance between Sarajevo and Banja Luka could be covered on a good road in 1.5. That is a state. That is a well-integrated nation. That was our plan back before the war, unquote. D639, page 9. But what about the defense's claim that the Bosnian Serbs, quote, did not foresee war as a possible outcome, unquote? That's again paragraph 312. Now, that claim would come, for example, as a great surprise to Cyrus Vance and Ambassador Oken, to whom Karadzic stated that if the Bosnian Serbs don't get what they want, they would get it through war. That's P3103, T4164, and pages 38 and 39. It would come as a surprise to Gojko Jogo, to whom Karadzic said that the Muslims would, quote, disappear, unquote, if there was a war. It will be a real bloodbath, Karadzic said. And he continued, it will be said to Europe, go fuck yourselves and do not come back before we finish the job, unquote. That's P4109, page 3, page 9, and page 24. The claim that the Bosnian Serb leadership did not foresee the possibility of war would come as a surprise to the Muslim and Croat members of the Joint Assembly, whom Karadzic threatened in October 1991 that their moves toward independence would result in, quote, the same highway of hell and suffering that Slovenia and Croatia went through. Don't think you won't take Bosnia and Herzegovina to hell and the Muslim people in possible extinction, because the Muslim people will not be able to defend itself if it comes to war here, unquote. P2004, page 3. And the claim that the Bosnian Serb leadership did not foresee war as a possibility would come as a surprise to Momcilo Krajišnik, who told the Assembly in February 1992, quote, we have two options, to fight by political means or to break off talks and go for what we have done over the centuries, win our territories by force. You know what our profession has always been, to wage war, unquote. P7005, pages 11 and 18. Momcilo Krajišnik, to whom Karadzic angrily said in January, talking about Izetbegovic, quote, now he's talking openly of a sovereign and independent Bosnia. Does he want someone to destroy Sarajevo? Fuck him. We will release our tigers and let them do their job, unquote. P2676, page 5. And the claim that the Bosnian Serb leadership did not foresee war as a possible outcome would come as a surprise to General Kukanec, Mladić's predecessor as head of the 2nd Military District, who reported in March 1992 that, quote, the Serbian leadership and the Serbian people are fully prepared to wage war should the confederal option not be accepted, unquote. And that the SDS leadership and the Serbian population have, quote, embraced the army, unquote, including that the JNA had, quote, distributed 51,900 weapons, 75%, and the SDS 17,298, unquote, to Bosnian Serbs in various municipalities. That's P3030, pages 4 through 6. In short, contrary to the defense claim, the Bosnian Serbs unmistakably, quote, foresaw, unquote, the possibility of war, prepared for it, and indeed used the threat of their military and their military force to pressure their political opponents into abandoning moves toward independence. Once again, scratch the surface of the defense brief, and it is the common purpose instead, which is revealed. The defense also claims that the Bosnian Serbs' involvement in negotiations, and that's found at paragraphs 292, 293, 298, 360 through 368 of the defense brief, and particularly their involvement in the Cudillero discussions, quote, contradicts the prosecution's allegation of the overarching JCE. That's in paragraph 364, 374. Again, contrary to this claim, the Bosnian Serb participation in negotiations was wholly compatible with the common purpose. First, of course, the pursuit of a negotiated solution does not gainsay the attempt to achieve maximum objectives by force if a compromise is not reached. But beyond that, the Bosnian Serbs were not engaged in the Kudalero negotiations out of some Gandhi-esque commitment to peace, but because it was clear to them that it could be used to destroy the possibility of a unitary Bosnia and to secure an ethnically defined state. Contrary to the representations made to Kudalero at the time, the Bosnian Serb leadership did not actually accept the fundamental terms of the Statement of Principles. Now, perhaps the single key principle within the Statement of Principles was that Bosnia would be a state. That's found at T 42409. As Karadzic told the Assembly, however, quote, "The first position in all Kudalero's principles, if you remember, was that Bosnia was a state consisting of this and that. But it was always said that Bosnia was a state. And we never accepted that," unquote. P 7023, page 2. As Kudalero himself acknowledged in this court, Karadzic withheld this position from Kudalero and instead feigned agreement with the Statement of Principles. T 42410 through 11. Similarly, the Statement of Principles did not envision that the Bosnian Serb entity would unite with Serbia. That's T 42411. The Bosnian Serb leadership's goal, however, was to have the Bosnian Serbs, quote, "become part of the Serbian Empire," unquote. P 7005, page 18. And as Kudalero acknowledged, if this view had actually been expressed, they wouldn't have had an agreement. P 7005 and T 42411 through 13. Furthermore, the maps were, quote, "totally unacceptable to the Bosnian Serb leadership." That's P 4582, page 4. The Bosnian Serbs, as Karadzic later explained, weren't satisfied with eastern Bosnia, with Sarajevo, with the Neretva River Valley, or with what he called the, quote, "green stain," unquote, meaning Muslim areas in northwest Bosnia, P 7294. So in the face of such fundamental disagreement, why did the Bosnian Serbs indicate agreement? They did so because they considered that they had, quote, "pulled," unquote, the Muslims into accepting that there would be a division and that it, quote, "would be based on ethnicity," unquote. D 639, page 7. As Karadzic explained, that was, quote, "fatal," unquote, for Izetbegovic in Bosnia, and a, quote, "grave mistake," unquote, by the international community. The Bosnian Serbs had, quote, "led them," unquote, to believe that the process would be successful. But at that instant, quote, "Bosnia was finished." That's P 4582, page 4. And as for the unacceptable maps, well, those would be taken care of in a different way. Karadzic and the Bosnian Serb leadership considered that they had achieved the, quote, "quality," unquote, that is, ethnic division, and the destruction of Bosnia. And so all that was left was, quote, "a question of quantity." That's P 4580. So what, Karadzic explained, if Bosnia remained within the current borders? Quote, "what matters is that the ones within Bosnia and Herzegovina become as wide as possible," unquote. P 7005, page 10. So provided they made their borders with Bosnia sufficiently wide, this would be as good as staying in Yugoslavia. Quote, as the popular saying goes, Karadzic told his officials, if kicked out the door, go back through the window, you will still be in the same place, unquote. That's P7005, page 10. And that would be determined by the principle of the factual or de facto situation. As Karadzic told his SDS officials at the assembly on the very day that the agreement in principle was at least temporarily reached, the quantity, quote, will happen according to the actual conditions which are up to you to create, unquote. And Krajisnik told the assembly at the very same session, quote, it would be good if we could do one thing for strategic reasons. If we could start implementing what we have agreed upon, the ethnic division on the ground, unquote. P4580, pages 44 and 13. And then once it became clear that Izetbegovic, who, like international negotiators such as Darwin and Carrington, had expressed doubts about the feasibility of ethnic divisions in an ethnically intermixed republic, and that's at T42393 and P7770, pages 3 and 4. Once it became clear that he had backed away, the Bosnian Serbs, in Kudilero's own words, quote, went brutally on the offensive, unquote. P771 and T42446 through 47. Went on the offensive and took by brutal force those areas denied them in the original Kudilero map, such as eastern Bosnia, Sarajevo, Neretva, and the green stain that Karadzic referred to in northwest Bosnia. Contrary to the claims of the defense, again, following the trail of the evidence leads inexorably to the common purpose. But while that was purposefully obscured in the context of the negotiations, those aims were repeatedly exposed. Exposed in the cruel logic of policies that claimed vast territories inhabited by people with whom it was ostensibly impossible to live. Exposed in the pattern of cleansing in municipality after municipality. And also exposed in what the Bosnian Serb leaders revealed to internationals, what they conveyed to their subordinates, and what they said to each other. It was, quote, obvious, unquote, crystal clear to UN Sector Commander Abdul Razik that there was a consensus among the Serb leaders and military commanders regarding cleansing. Karadzic, Krajisnik, and Mladić acknowledged their plan for removal of Muslims from Serb territories. And Karadzic and Mladić once told him, quote, Muslims will be transferred out of Serb territory because we can't live together, unquote. And told him if we, quote, miss this chance, we will not have it again, unquote. That's P293, paragraph 33. The Bosnian Serb leaders also explained to UN Representative Harland that historical circumstances required the removal of very large numbers of Bosnian Muslims, particularly in eastern Bosnia, and were open about wanting non-Serbs out of their territories. That's P1, paragraphs 270 and 274. Similarly, it was apparent to Anthony Banbury from his repeated meetings with the Bosnian Serb leadership that, quote, ethnic cleansing was a policy of the Bosnian Serbs. They wanted only Serbs living on the territory they controlled, unquote. That's P874, paragraph 63. As Ambassador Oken explained, the position of the Bosnian Serb leadership throughout the whole period was that the people had to be separated, that they could not live together. Even though the populations were thoroughly intermixed, the Bosnian Serb leadership position was that they had to be taken apart. And that, Oken explained, is of course what ethnic cleansing was designed to do. The leadership told him that Republika Srpska was to be as homogeneous ethnically, that is ethnically, quote, pure, unquote, was the word that was often used by the Bosnian Serbs, ethnically pure as it could be. P3103, page 4169. And all Bosnian Serb leaders were very consistent in their position that physical separation was needed and that the communities could not live together. P3103, T4205, and 4220. The policy was exposed to and known to Serbian and Croatian Serb leaders. For example, in July 1991, in a meeting in Slobodan Milosevic's office, Karadzic insisted that Babic not move forward with a proposed Krajina unification because it would interfere with the Bosnian Serb plans to form a Bosnian Serb entity that included territories where Serbs were a minority. Karadzic explained that they would wait for Alija to make a wrong political move and then link up the Serb territories by expelling Muslims. That's P4167, T13054 through 56, and P4166, T3401 through 04. It was known in the municipalities where local leaders implemented it. As Ilija Crisis Staff President Prstojevic acknowledged in July 1992, when Karadzic, quote, visited us in Ilija and encouraged us, the Serbs from Sarajevo retained control over the territory and even extended their territory in some areas, driving the Muslims out of the territories where they had actually been a majority. That's P4581, page 66. On the 30th of June 1992, Mladić and Karadzic met in Zvornik with military and civilian authorities from Zvornik, Vlasenica, Srebrenica, Bratunac, and other local areas. At which Zvornik TO Commander Pavlović bragged to Karadzic, quote, we were most active in evicting the Muslims, unquote. And Crisis Staff President Grujic reported, quote, we have successfully implemented the President's decision to settle Divic and Kozluk with our children, unquote. The policy found expression in the selection by local leaders of particular percentages of Muslims and Croats allowed to leave. In Sanski Most, 2%, in Bijeljina, 2%, 5 to 6% in Kluč, in Banja Luka and the Ark generally, a small percentage. And you can find those respectively at P365, T6771 through 73, at P1054, paragraphs 1131 through 32, adjudicated facts 750, transcript 2050 through 51, and P3989, pages 1 through 3, P6994, page 8. And local leaders also acknowledged the common plan without reference to particular percentages. For example, the Rogatica Crisis Staff President and Brigade Commander referred on one instance to running late with the cleansing. P309, paragraphs 90 through 91.
Mr. Tiga, would you please look at page 36, line 18, whether that is, I don't remember what I heard, but whether that is what you...
Yes, I think that's correct, Mr. President. I had said successfully implemented the President's decision to settle Divic and Kozluk with our children.
Yes, but I'm looking two
No.
lines further down.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, perhaps I'm looking at the other. Allowed to, Muslim and Croats allowed to. But
Oh,
if
I'm
you-
sorry, and thank you, I appreciate that. It should say allowed to remain.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
please proceed.
When this policy was not fulfilled, the Bosnian Serb leadership followed up. In personal meetings, Karadzic admonished Banja Luka Mayor Predrag Radić for not having expelled non-Serbs or destroyed mosques, in contrast to other municipalities. You can find that at the prosecution brief, paragraph 284, footnotes 1145 through 46. That was confirmed by defense witness Solaya, who testified about the constant pressure Radić was under from people at the political top, unquote, and criticism of him because mosques were not standing. You can find that at T 32751 through 52. Mosques were still standing. I think I said not standing. So the criticism of Radić was for the fact that mosques remained and had not been destroyed. The common purpose was also acknowledged by Karadzic at various times, including when he explained to the assembly his concern earlier in the war that Muslims might agree to peace proposals. Now, why concerned? Because, quote, we had some unfinished tasks related to military actions. I just prayed to God that nothing would be accepted because we had some tasks to complete, unquote. And what were those military tasks? Well, in Doughboy, he said the Muslims had been in the relative majority. But, quote, nowadays, Doughboy is almost 100% Serbian. The people from mountains moved in the town, and so on. Thus, we can consider ourselves as winners after occupying this land, since the land is 100% Serbian now. Unquote. And that's P 3076, pages 23, 25, and 26. The policy was acknowledged during a January 1993 meeting of Bosnian Serb and Serbian leaders, including Mladić, Karadzic, and Milosevic. When Serbian Foreign Minister Jovanović urged Mladić and Karadzic to pursue the objective of making Bosnian Serb territory, quote, nationally homogenous as soon as possible, unquote, by more subtle means than ethnic cleansing, because the international community was looking to catch them at the ethnic cleansings. Jovanović also warned that freedom of movement might lead to mixing of the populations, with the result that, quote, what had been gained would gradually erode, unquote. Karadzic assured him that national homogenization had already happened, quote, to a huge extent, unquote, citing with pride Zvornik, where there was 50-50 of us, and now, quote, the number of inhabitants of Zvornik is the same, approximately 50,000, and they are all Serbs, unquote. That's P7746, pages 14 through 16. The adoption of more subtle and deniable forms of purifying the territories was reflected in the Bosnian Serbs' leadership's use of Vojkan, who cleansed Bijeljina of thousands of remaining Muslims in 1994, prompting international complaints and false promises by the Bosnian Serb leadership to investigate. See P7699, page 2, paragraph 7. As Karadzic reminded Mladić and others at a session of the Supreme Command, having Muslims remain is, quote, disastrous for us, unquote. Vojkan's cleansing, however, under the guise of a private agency, permitted the leadership deniability. by, quote, turning a blind eye, unquote, they could further our policy of, quote, separation of peoples, of cultures, of worlds, and no one can accuse us. That's P 6723, pages 6 through 7. In the face of such overwhelming evidence, the defense suggests that an alleged republic-level policy that all citizens would be allowed to return belies the existence of the common purpose to permanently remove. And that's found in paragraph 459 of the defense brief. What would be the point, they argue, of forcibly removing people only to let them back in? Well, as it happens, it is that very logic that explains why the Bosnian Serb leadership repeatedly made clear that it would ensure against the return of those they had expelled. From the very outset, the Bosnian Serb leadership had banked on the establishment of a factual situation to their advantage. As Karadzic explained to a gathering of top Serbian and Bosnian Serb officials at a meeting of the SFRY presidency in December 1991, Serbs had to prepare to press their case on not only a legal basis, but on, quote, the factual basis. That's P 4927. In the immediate aftermath of the joint assembly session at which Karadzic warned Muslims that moves toward independence threatened their very existence, Karadzic explained to Milosevic that the Bosnian Serbs were, quote, moving on, unquote, to establish a, quote, de facto situation on 65% of Bosnia, which the Muslims will break their teeth on. That's P 2659, pages 1 and 7. In mid-February 1992, when Karadzic activated the second level of variant A and B, he told his officials that, quote, now it would be more important to gain the real situation, the factual situation on the ground, unquote, which would allow Serbs to say to negotiators that maybe the Muslims are right, but the factual situation controls. That's P 3774, page 5. And as noted a few moments ago, a month after that, shortly before the takeovers began, Karadzic told his SDS officials at the assembly that the quantity of their state, quote, will happen according to the actual conditions which are up to you to create, unquote. P 4580, page 44 through 13. And General Mladić and the VRS continued to implement the policy of creating a new factual situation and using it to control the ultimate territorial resolution. As General Mladić said, quote, whoever holds the territory also draws the maps, unquote. And it was, quote, the people and its army, unquote, who had drawn those maps. P 1974, page 5. And like Oken, UNPROFOR recognized that General Mladić wanted them to, quote, authenticate the new lines of ethnic division, unquote. That's P 2810, paragraph 2. Karadzic underscored to General Mladić in 1992 that, quote, the European community will accept the factual state of affairs, and that is why we should not make a single concession in military terms, unquote. P 354, page 22. And General Mladić conveyed the importance of that policy to his troops, reminding his Corps Command in Directive 2, quote, we liberated the territories we considered ours and created conditions for political and military leadership of the Serbian Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina so that they could perform all activities and negotiations regarding the future state of BIH from the position of the stronger one in this territory. That's D 99, page 1. And that message was indeed heard after the 1KK had conducted ethnic cleansing operations throughout the Ark. 1KK Commander Mladić noted to Mladić the importance of insisting on, quote, the factual situation, unquote. That's P360, page 54. We liberated the territories. That's the language from Directive 2 that we saw a moment ago in the previous slide. The defense defends the term liberated as meaning only, quote, fighting against aggression. And that's found at the defense final brief at paragraph 704. A more accurate understanding of its meaning, however, may be gleaned from a 6 June 1992 meeting at which a Bratnatz municipal leader reported to Karadzic and Mladić, among others, that, quote, there are no Muslims now in Bratnatz municipality. It is a fully liberated town, unquote. That's P353, page 101. The success of VRS operations meant that General Mladić would be able to report that the de facto approach had been successfully implemented. In 1993, General Mladić expressed the main staff's appreciation that, quote, our negotiating team have done everything to change the factual state into permanent, and reminded Karadzic, as I noted earlier, quote, Mr. President, you have started from the most favorable starting position in Geneva. You had the military result in your hands. That's again P2508, page 33. I think it's time for a break, Your Honor, and we can continue in 20 minutes.
It is indeed, Mr. Tiga. Let's take a break. We resume at 10 minutes past midday.
All rise. We will leave it.